Hello. So in this video for Black History Month 2025, we're going to be talking about Langston Hughes's The Weary Blues. So this is, I think, the first poetry book published by Langston Hughes. Hughes is an absolutely incredible poet. He's the African-American poet in many ways. And what I mean by that basically is if you were going to pick a single poet to represent African-American poetry across the board, Hughes would have to be a top contender in that discussion. His work, while it doesn't obviously embody all trends of African-American poetry across all time, his work does reflect elements that are foundational to African-American literature in general, but poetry especially. Things like the use of music as a foundation, jazz and blues, particularly for Langston Hughes, obviously later hip-hop, rap, and other genres developed primarily by African Americans come to be major influences in African American writing, especially poetry, but blues and jazz for Hughes. Questions about the role of race in American life, of racism as a structuring factor in American life, the role and place of African Americans in the world, etc., etc. All of these things Hughes deals with, and these things, again, are these sort of central thematic elements in much African-American poetry. So he's also just genuinely a properly good poet. So I'm going to read you probably several of his poems because they're so good, and many of them are quite short. So I want to start with some poems that reflect his use of blues and jazz and other traditionally African-American musical forms as a foundation or inspiration for his writing. So I'll start with the title poem, The Weary Blues. Droning a drowsy syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play down on Lenox Avenue the other night by the pale, dull pallor of an old gas light. He did a lazy sway, to the tune of those weary blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody, oh blues. Swaying to and fro on his rickety stool, he sang that sad, raggy tune like a musical fool, sweet blues, but coming from a black man's soul, oh blues. In a deep song voice with a melancholy tone, I heard that Negro sing that old piano moan. Ain't got nobody in all this world, ain't got nobody but myself. I's gwine to quit my frownin' and put my troubles on the shelf. Thump, thump, thump went his foot on the floor. He played a few chords, then he sang some more. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. Got the weary blues and can't be satisfied. I ain't happy no more and I wish that I had died. And far into the night he crooned that tune. The stars went out, and so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and went to bed, while the weary blues echoed through his head. He slept like a rock or a man that's dead. And so, I mean, obviously, blues is central here, right? We have a direct evocation of a blues performance with the lyrics of a blues song incorporated. It's also worth noting, hi Rank, my cat is making an appearance in this video. It's also worth noting that Hughes was a major figure one of really the driving forces of what's called the Harlem Renaissance. And so in a poem like The Weary Blues, when he mentions Lenox Avenue, this is in Harlem, I believe. There's other poems that are more sort of directly evocative of, or not evocative of, but more directly name Harlem as a location. But I want to stick for the moment with the influence of music on Hughes's writing. So the next one I'm going to read you is Song for a Banjo Dance. And of course, the banjo it's an American instrument, but it is an instrument that comes from African roots. They're distinct forms of West African lute that evolved or transitioned into the American banjo. And of course, banjo music. Bluegrass is really a Scots-Irish, has Scots-Irish roots, but the banjo and a lot of sorry, my cat, I couldn't tell if my cat was looking at a bug or not on the floor. Anyway, so I mean, the banjo is a major player in the development of distinctly African-American forms of music. So this is Song for a Banjo Dance. Shake your brown feet, honey, shake your brown feet, child, shake your brown feet, honey, shake 'em swift and wild. Get way back, honey, do that low down step. Walk on over, darling, now come out with your left. Shake your brown feet, honey, shake 'em, honey, child. Sun's going down this evening, might never rise no more. The sun's going down this very night, might never rise no more. So dance with swift feet, honey, the banjo's sobbing low. Dance with swift feet, honey, might never dance no more. Shake your brown feet, Liza, shake 'em, Liza, child. Shake your brown feet, Liza, the music's soft and wild. Shake your brown feet, Liza, the banjo's sobbing low. The sun's going down this very night, might never rise no more. And so again, this is clearly lyrical poetry, right? Lyrical poetry is a genre of poetry, or a method of writing in which poems are constructed rhythmically so that they could be set to music and sung if they want. The origins of lyric poetry are, in fact, with music, right? Because poetry is, of course, a genre that is meant to be performed. That's the origin of it. That's where it comes from. And you can definitely hear that in the rhythms of Hughes's poetry. And again, they're rhythms drawn from blues, drawn from jazz, drawn from country banjo music in this case. Here's another one, Harlem Night Song, specifically bringing in Harlem as an identifiable place, but also that musicality, titling this as a song. This is Harlem Night Song. Come, let us roam the night together, singing, I love you. Across the Harlem rooftops, moon is shining, night sky is blue, stars are great drops of golden dew. In the cabaret, the jazz band's playing, I love you. Come, let us roam the night together, singing. And so again, one of the things that you have that's very typical of lyrical poetry is these repetitions, right? These repetitions of lines, of refrains or choruses, and all of that helps to build rhythm, helps to build a melody to the poem. And Hughes is a master of that. He's extremely good at it. So the other sort of major element that I want to focus on with these poems is the concern with race. Obviously, a big part of the Harlem Renaissance was that it was centered in Harlem, which was the African-American neighborhood of New York City in the 1920s, 30s, 1910s, when the Harlem Renaissance was occurring. Because this was a primarily African-American area in a very, very racist country. The U.S. is still quite a racist country, but often we now try to let systemic racism do the work of racism rather than sort of overt cross-burnings and things like that. Although, given where this country seems to be headed, we may be going back to that. But part of what the Harlem Renaissance was really invested in was proving that African Americans, that Black people in general, could create art, could be intelligent, could have developed social commentary, etc., etc. And so a lot of the work that came out of the Harlem Renaissance and a lot of the subsequent African-American poetry inspired by the Harlem Renaissance has dealt with issues of race, racism, the place of people of color in the United States, etc. And it is, of course, a mixed bag in terms of how these poets have approached these topics, because on the one hand, there's a tremendous amount of racism and internalized racism, etc., all of this negative affect associated with it. But again, one of the projects of the Harlem Renaissance was to evoke pride in one's identity, in one's culture, one's ethnicity or race, etc., etc. So I'm going to read you a few of Hughes's poems that deal with race, with racism, with the place of African Americans or people of color in the United States. And the first one is Proem, which is actually sort of a prefatory poem before the first section, the first proper section of this book. So this is Proem. I am a Negro, black as the night is black, black like the depths of my Africa. I've been a slave. Caesar told me to keep his doorsteps clean. I've brushed the boots of Washington. I've been a worker. Under my hand the pyramids arose. I made mortar for the Woolworth building. I've been a singer. All the way from Africa to Georgia, I carried my sorrow songs. I made ragtime. I've been a victim. The Belgians cut off my hands in the Congo. They lynch me now in Texas. I am a Negro, black as the night is black, black like the depths of my Africa. And so again, you get this complicated sense of identity here, in that on the one hand, there is a tremendous amount of suffering built into the African American experience, racism, violence, slavery, devastation, etc., etc. But on the other hand, there is that opening and closing stanza, which sort of resonates with this pride in Hughes's identity, or in the poet persona's identity, I should say. So here's another one, just called Poem. To the Black Beloved. Ah, my black one, thou art not beautiful, yet thou hast a loveliness surpassing beauty. Oh, my black one, thou art not good, yet thou hast a purity surpassing goodness. Ah, my black one, thou art not luminous, yet an altar of jewels, an altar of shimmering jewels, would pale in the light of thy darkness, pale in the light of thy nightness. And this is an interesting one because clearly I think there's a Shakespearean influence here. I forget which sonnet it is, but there's a Shakespeare sonnet in which he takes all of these sort of poetic tropes of feminine beauty and inverts them. It says, "My beloved doesn't have these qualities." And Hughes is doing the same thing here, but he's doing it, I think there's an additional twist to it. It is not just irony. It is not just an ironic form of adoration. It is a form of adoration that goes beyond irony to say, Black people do not meet the traditional white standards of beauty, and it is in that not meeting those standards that their beauty comes. So this idea of an altar of shimmering jewels would pale in the light of thy darkness, pale in the light of thy nightness. Normally, in sort of standard stereotypical love poetry, you would expect the beloved to be compared to a jewel, and the jewel to be found less luminous, right? But here it is the darkness of dark skin that becomes the source of luminousness, right? It is an inversion of the norm that would go that one would expect with a sort of stereotypical love poem. It's cool. It's an interesting technique, and it really does sort of challenge. It really does challenge these sort of notions of beauty and poetic imagery. Now, the last one I'm going to read to you. This is one of the most famous poems in the world, certainly one of the most famous American poems. And my guess would be that this is probably the most anthologized African-American poem of any. The Negro Speaks of Rivers. To W.E.B. Du Bois. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers.